Hi everyone, I'm Briana Morgan. I'm in CAS with a major in English and a Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies minor. I'll be abbreviating that to just WGS from this point forward because it is a bit of a mouthful. And today we'll be digging into feminism and queer theory with the scoop. Hello. Okay. Before we delve into my project, I want to preface with a brief understanding of feminism, where it started and where it's going. Generally speaking, feminism is the belief that everyone, regardless of gender or sexual orientation, should be respected and treated equally. These images, or ones like these, may be what comes to mind when we think of feminist movements. Historically, however, these movements favored white, cisgendered, heterosexual women, even if queer folk and women of color played a major role in the movement's success. Unfortunately, when it comes down to it, feminism and queer theory have a major issue with exclusivity. In addition to feminist movements minimizing the voices and impact of women of color, the censoring continues into today. At the university level, there is a huge problem with WGS curricula having an amount of books and theories written by white women that is disproportionate relative to books and theories by women of color. Also, the majority of public school curricula do not include topics relating to feminism or queer issues. For example, my home state of Florida recently passed the Don't Say Gay bill, which prevents schools from being able to talk about sexuality or gender in any capacity. This causes young students to be left to their own devices to educate themselves on feminism and queer theory, and the information that is available to them is not as informative as scholarly works. Lastly, the language used in foundational texts is often just as inaccessible as the physical books are themselves. This brings me to the scoop, which was created after a semester-long reading project that included classic and contemporary works, with a focus on queer theorists and women of color theorists. So you may be asking, what is the scoop? The Scoop is a zine that introduces WGS to high school students. For those unsure of what a zine is, it is a small, self-published work that focuses on an unconventional or specialized topic. I used funky animal illustrations and thought-provoking exercises to help bolster the informative content of the zine. However, I do explain complex topics like Judith Butler's gender performativity and Kimberly Crenshaw's intersectionality in a way that I feel best reaches high school students' vernacular. This being said, profanity is featured throughout the piece. The Scoop acts as a learning guide for high school students or even a general audience. All are welcome to dig in. I believe that learning WGS topics at an earlier age will give students tools to engage in social issues in a more productive way, such as providing sources or facts outside of social media. Most importantly, it will also open readers' minds to ways that society has created and perpetuated systems of oppression that act on individuals differently. Here's an excerpt from Fuck the Binary, the zine's chapter on sex and gender. It reads, "Gender is something we all interact with every day. In fact, Judith Butler describes gender as an act that we perform every day. In her theory of gender performativity, she explains that we create our gender through the repetition of how we express ourselves in our physical appearance, actions, and mannerisms. Mannerisms are things we do without really thinking about it, like how women typically cross their legs when sitting, while men spread and sit with their legs wide open. I also propose an exercise for the reader, with additional space underneath for them to respond or to just doodle if they want to. The goal is for it to be an interactive experience." This is just a quick video flipping through the digital version of the zine, which is available on issue.com. Before I show you, let me say a little more of what to expect. I begin with an introduction on WGS, including the issue about exclusivity and how we can be more intersectional and diverse in movements forward. Or movements to come, my bad. I then dive into chapters of gender and sexuality, intersectionality, and 2 quick takes on healthcare inequities and workforce inequality. If you would like the link to the Scoop, feel free to talk to me after the presentation, and now we will move forward in the video. So here is the introduction, and all of the chapters are color-coded, so it's easier for the reader to know where they're at. Here's the Fuck the Binary chapter, and then it moves into the ins and outs of intersectionality, which is a pretty long chapter, and it includes the exercises, and then we have the 2 quick takes. I want to thank you all for listening, and I also want to thank KHC for allowing this exploration to happen, and my biggest thank you to my advisor, Professor Marie McDonough. You encourage me to be better and inspire me always. I don't know how I would have gotten through this without your guidance, and I'm really proud of what I ended up creating. Any questions?
Wonderful work. Even a goat.
Hi, Bree.
Hi, Alex.
Do you have any plans to implement or work with school systems to get this taught, or do you just plan on making it available digitally for kind of those pursuing their own research?
I do have plans to try to get it implemented in high schools, but that's kind of halted given COVID and restrictions due to that. And also by state law, for example, Florida, I wouldn't be able to get this in their curricula at all. I wouldn't be able to even show this to students with the teacher's knowledge or the principal's knowledge. But I would love for this to be more accessible to high school students, but unfortunately right now it's pretty difficult.
So how did you decide what chapters you were going to focus on for this zine?
So to decide what chapters I wanted to focus on, it was a matter of trying to narrow down problems or topics that I feel are most, not apparent, but topics that are more at the forefront of women's and gender studies, what you learn when you first enter the classroom. So I wanted to break those things down first, and then hopefully I can create more editions of the zine to cover more diverse topics and things that are less touched upon in like introductory women's and gender studies courses.
Could you say more about the relationship between the medium of the zine and the content you're discussing in it? Like, is there something specific about zines that makes it good for this subject matter?
Yeah, so I personally love zines, and it's not an uncommon thing for especially queer folk to look for zines for information on what they need to know, or not what they need to know, but what is kind of circulating in that sphere. There is a digital queer zine archive available online, and that was where I first came in contact with that kind of format, and along with Professor McDonough's class on zines. So I knew that medium is good for getting information that can be complex out in a more digestible way to a general audience. So, and plus it's more fun to create because you can kind of do what you want with it. If I had done a paper on this topic, I wouldn't have been able to draw fun animals. So it gave me creative liberty for my own self and my mental being of just wanting to create, and then also gave me the ability to get this content out.
So I know you describe your aesthetic, your visual aesthetic as funky. I wonder if you could say a little bit more about what we might gain from, there's a very kind of childhood resonance to your aesthetic. I noticed you even have that line on the inside cover, this book belongs to, and it's a little bit nostalgic and playful in that age sense. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what that might allow us to do as we're learning about these ideas.
That is an amazing question. So I think my own personal aesthetic is kind of that childhood nostalgia, and that really does bleed into it, but I think it bolsters the information because the content, especially in the quick takes, can be really hard to not understand, but to come to terms with. So these little cartoons are just ways to relax the brain, I guess, and I included the This Zine Belongs To at the beginning because I really do want it to be an interactive thing for readers to have, and so they can make it their own and do like interpret the information however they want to.
I think there should be goats in essays,
Period.
in all essays required. Thank you so much. Maybe one more question if we have time. Yes? Okay. So as you looked at zines, I mean, you did a wonderful critique of WGS curricula. Were you also finding that zines were lacking the information that you seek to share with your funky zine?
So surprisingly, zines are very informative on women's gender and sexuality issues. A lot of the zines that I learned about in Professor McDonough's class were of that same vein. So I feel that it is more inclusive of that topic than like essays or scholarship, and it's also a much more fun way of learning about it. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's...
Great. Thank you so much.